Once again, it's time for the Cult of Honesty. This is actually a program, and right now we're dedicated to the proposition that all people, both atheists and theists alike, were created equal, not in the sense of a godly creation. And so we are just taking it from there, that we have the ability to create a conversation. We have the ability to move forward. We have the ability to actually converse without being judgmental or harsh, but we can actually have a meaningful conversation and put everything that we understand to be true or whatever on the table for discussion. Today, my wife and I had a wonderful experience with our insurance guy. He came to our house. He spent, normally it's just about 15 minutes and that's it, but he must have spent at least 2.5 hours with us. It was a wonderful experience, simply because he picked up one of the coffee cups that I wish everyone in the Google Hangout had tonight. It was actually a New Covenant group coffee cup, and it has atheists and theists alike, and he kept looking at it, and so we started talking about the New Covenant group, and we told him what it was, and for the first time in his life, he revealed that he was an atheist. And he said that most of the time when he goes to homes and he talks about insurance, he said most of the people will ask him what religion he is of, etc. And he will say, well, I was raised Catholic, and he just leaves it at that. But he felt so comfortable today that he could be transparent with us. And that to me was a special time, because he wanted to continue the conversation, because he had been censored for so many years, and I found that to be a wonderful, wonderful experience. And with that said, what I would like to do, I would like to go into the Google Hangout and carry that same tone into our conversation. But before we go too far in the conversation, I would certainly like to ask Bob to come into the conversation, simply to give us some variety. He's an excellent guitar player, and he's the unconventional pastor and a host of other things that are all positive. And I would like for you to give us a demonstration of various styles. Can you give us a taste of what it sounds like to play rock and roll music? That would be nice.
Oh, I'm not all that spontaneous of a person, I guess, but anyway, this is my computerized guitar. It's a James Tyler Variax, and a little bit of rock and roll, Of course, the early thing can make it sound like a lot of different guitars. So let me see if I can find something here that just
Beatles.
Beatles, stuff like. Oh yeah, I just love Beatles.
Yeah, that's nice.
Beatles all day.
Now you did I think it was a country riff the other day, and it reminded me of things that my father liked, and so I think it was similar to a Fender Stratocaster. Can you do that sound for us?
I think it was actually like more of a telly.
Okay.
I was doing it.
Yeah, that's nice. Give us one more style before we get into the conversation. One more style before.
One more style.
Yeah, one more style.
that little banjo.
That's nice. That's
Guitar, what song you
I mean, that's really nice. I want to thank you and Greg specifically tonight. You guys have been on with us for just right over a year, and you guys have done a wonderful job on your shows. And we've had so many people who have come our way simply because you guys have really been extremely honest and really giving. I mean, both of you guys are exceptionally talented. You guys are brilliant. Greg, you have put so many things on the table. You did a brilliant presentation of evolution, and your conversations with Bob have been so productive. And all of us here at in CG Studios here in Pensacola are just, so thankful that you guys are here. And so with that said, let's get into the conversation tonight. You guys have the topics. I don't even know exactly where we're going, but Greg, why don't you start it out?
Well, there's a handful of topics that we wanted to cover today. Specifically, I know that last week I say we using the royal we because I was not able to make it, but we talked about Ray Comfort and his most recent video release, the Evolution versus God video, along with a few other things that tied into it, and that led into a conversation about emotions, which is seemingly a different topic, but not so much if you watch the video. The topics that were suggested for today, and I'd like to, I guess, focus on as well. I mean, it's pretty open form. We want to go with the flow in making it the best conversation that we can all have together. But some things that were suggested was the question of nature versus nurture as far as human development goes. And then along with that, I am very curious about the idea of free will that would sort of go along with that, or a free will or determinism. Then also, Christopher Maudy was the one who recommended the mind-body dualism, and I see a little bit more about that one being, let's see, how did I write that? It's spirituality and the concept of the soul. And frankly, a lot of the arguments that are made by apologists, especially, this is a very popular one that William Lane Craig pushes, is the duality or the separateness of the consciousness from the brain, or the mind from the brain. So all different things that we'd like to discuss, and I don't know where we should start. Bob, what do you think?
Oh, I like the idea of free will, determinism, but that's just tickles me. So, but if somebody here has something that that really pushes a button with them and they want to say
now,
something,
Bob, do you like that because of your own personal free will, or is this something that has been determined that you will like that?
Well,
I was a loaded question.
It's been destined from the moment you were born that you would be tickled by that topic.
What I'm going to eat for dinner 10 years from tonight is yet for me to discover, but it's already, it's already, in the works. No, I believe that determinism and free will are often exaggerated extremes, and I don't believe in. I believe that many things are very determined. I don't think that everything is determined. I believe there is a measure of freedom of choice, but I don't believe it is anywhere near as broad or as wide as we would like to think it is.
Anybody else have anything to add on that? I mean,
maybe we're done.
It's hard for me to say free will. Like, if nobody speaks, is it now then on to me? Was I predestined to make a comment that's going to spark somebody else making a comment here? This one, I'm going to, I guess, go off on this one a bit because I love this topic. It's really interesting to me, the idea of determinism, and frankly, it makes a lot of sense. There's quite a bit of physics and neurobiology and several other things that basically say that we are a product of our environment and of the forces that are around us. But I guess the issue that I take with that, or the question that I have from it is, why does that matter? Why is that incompatible with the idea of free will? I mean, it's not like we walk up to a situation and we see a street or even, you know, a child falling from something, and our entire life experience up to that point doesn't compel us to do something anyway. I don't think there's anybody who looks at a situation as if this is their first moment on Earth and that they are completely unfamiliar with everything around them. So why is the concept that we are living in a deterministic state where our past determines our future even shocking in the least?
I don't know if that's even the best way to describe it. It's not so much that the past determines our future, but rather that that according to determinism, you know, time is unfolding, and you know, one thing leads to another, and it's basically really on a trajectory. So the past was, you know, yesterday was, according to determinism, just as determined as today was from the day before that, you know. So you know, so there's a sense in which you want to really perceive it as an entire whole and merely find a particular place on the time spectrum where you might say, and here's where it's at this point in time.
One thing that I think needs to be maybe clarified or at least brought up, and that is, in my experience, when you talk about the subject of free will, it nearly always has to do with God or religion. And would that be the perspective we're taking tonight, or just the fact that we're human beings and we can go whatever direction we want to go? Or, you know, maybe a little clarification there.
I think that's the conundrum right there. Is there free will, or is it determined? If it's determined, what determines it? Is it a theistic God, or is it our biology, or is it the environment, or is it our past? And is it a theistic problem, or it is an atheistic problem? Because theists can just be like, yeah, it's deterministic, and it's determined by God. Excuse me. And it's an atheistic problem to solve. We haven't figured out. Go. So, I mean, that's what makes
the idea gets brought up quite a bit with the determinism and morality. That are you responsible for your actions then? And if you're acting only in a deterministic universe, is there such a thing as a right and a wrong? I've seen that one brought up quite a bit as well.
I think that it changes it. Certainly, I don't think it necessarily even changes the fact that we should respond to this as part of the way of minimizing behavior that is determined to have been perceived as unproductive, you know, so that still bringing consequences for situations that ultimately people are not really responsible for still makes sense, you know, and in fact you would actually not bring consequences based upon the way you are deterministically responding to the notion of being determined, you know. So it just constantly mumbles and jumbles, and you know, so I think that the morality question actually fizzles out into something impractical, personally.
Does that mean that we're living in an amoral universe, though? That morality itself just doesn't exist?
It would mean that the problem needs to be defined by something other than morality, but it's still a problem and still needs the solutions it requires. But to call it morality is an illusion. I'm speaking from the standpoint of determinism. I'm not a determinist, but I would understand that position to really get rid of the concept of morality, but not entirely. Replace it with a more workable, more accurate model.
When it comes to
I
determinism,
think that
you have
Go ahead.
various models of determinism. For instance, you have the linear concepts of determinism, and then you have that which would be construed as a punctiliar. You know, you have these isolated pockets. In what I mean by that, to explain the term, I can say that something is punctiliar. It's a snapshot in time, whether that snapshot is 30, 40 years or a billion years has nothing to do with it. It's just a snapshot in time, however long it might be or however short it might be. And my point is, a lot of the models of determinism are based upon, these punctiliar ideas. You have a certain paradigm, and then you have a paradigm shift. And so are we talking about determinism with paradigm shifts, that is, these punctiliar states, or are we talking about that which is linear? What are your ideas, Greg?
I really, I don't know. I have trouble with the determinism as way, just looking at it from the physics thing, the fact that there are truly random events like virtual particles popping in and out of existence.
Right. And you can't predict where they will be.
Exactly.
Right, and random, the atomic decay happens completely randomly, although it is predictable at its rate. The location and any individual atom could outlive its half-life a millionfold, which is if it happens to be in a large enough number. So that's also, these are truly random events that make the idea of determinism a far less solid concept when we look about it on such a detailed scale. And these tiny random fluctuations could certainly have ramifications through and across all of the universe, including our own lives. So
that's Michio Kaku's argument. Yeah, that's Michio Kaku's argument, by the way. He talks about how Einstein was wrong, that God does indeed roll dice.
Right.
And so he it's one thing to claim that. It's another thing to see how this opens up the door of possibility, and quite another thing to think of how this in any manner enters in. Personally, from a standpoint of personality, I perceive my free will as having to do with my freedom to reconsider. And that doesn't mean I will always choose to reconsider. But the truth is, I think a lot of the conclusions I come to when I solve a problem were inevitable to be reached given the values, the history, and things that I have, and given the values that I'm currently embracing and the sense of morality that I have. So I do see that the ability to reconsider my perspective, reconsider my focus, can alter the direction in which I will be determined thereby to go.
Now you're talking my language. Now you're bringing it to a psychological level, because talking about the physics, I know that feeds into the deterministic, to some deterministic philosophies.
Right.
But I'm so glad to be a part of this conversation, because I would have never thought to include an argument from physics in the way that I was interpreting the deterministic argument. I was always couching it within psychology.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I was always thinking from a personal level, the choices that an individual makes, are they predetermined? Does an individual have the freedom that is the free will component? And I was chewing on that since the topic came up.
If the possibility did not exist in physics, if physics could prove that every aspect of physics is absolutely the predictable result of the previous state of being, it would create, in my opinion, a powerful argument for the illusion of freedom. But because of the nature of subatomic particles and what we see, we now realize we can't make that statement. And so we have no clue how this really works, but we now know we're no longer constrained or forced to the concept of determinism.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that I wanted to bring in is the exact thing that you brought up about your ability to reconsider. Your ability to reconsider is essentially the power of counseling and psychology, and by that I mean clinical psychology, and its ability to impact your trajectory, which I would say is an argument against determinism, unless you are to say that it was determined that you would meet somebody that changed your trajectory, which I guess makes sense.
I think that we're living in a balance. There are various things that are operating on deterministic concepts and principles. but that they can be, the energy of them can be redirected or altered through moments wherein free will can actually shift directions. And so that I would say that there's a sense in which I don't really believe that we have the kind of free will we think. For example, if I'm struggling with a decision tonight about, let's see, or today, do I buy this guitar or not? It's quite possible that my reconsiderations of values and this and that were really not in play, and that I was determined to buy this guitar. I just didn't know it until I finally was conscious of making the decision. There's so that I think there's a great deal that we do that is determined. But life is unfolding in front of us, and we have no idea what sort of. It's a chaos. It's a multiplicity of factors coming together. But but with all of them coming together, they determine what's going to go until something happens that can put some English into the inertia of things. And I do think the ability to reconsider, particularly morality, the question of love or abandonment of love. I think that there are moments when we are confronted with it, and that is a moment of free will.
Let me ask you a question, Bob, concerning your ideas here. Chomsky argues that, and I'm going to put it loosely because I think that we have an audience that needs something more in a simplistic manner, but he makes the argument that at one time we did not have the spoken language, and we would all agree with that. And at one point in time, one individual, started that in a sense. And so from that one individual, everything else evolved. And we do have these shifts. Do you think that language itself, in the sense that I'm speaking, that is the spoken language, do you think that was determined, or was it an issue of free will?
I would say that once language became a possibility, it was completely determined that it would become a possibility, and that we will speak is also determined. What we speak, how we put speech together, how cultures develop the biosemiotic concepts that create their language is based entirely on free will. So they're based on choices that have to do with values, and some of them extremely trivial.
So are you suggesting
but it's
these
very
are
arbitrary?
Okay, are you suggesting in a sense these are working like Olympic circles? Sometimes these two ideas have overlapping areas.
Right.
And,
well, we know this from studying language, that we've studied the various ways that languages function and structure themselves. How do various languages create plurals? How do various languages create tense or aspect? And we've discovered that languages do these things. We've also discovered that they do these in radically different ways, so that it seems that the specific choices of language are very arbitrary, but the fact of language is not arbitrary.
do you think the genetic factors that make up all the creativity that is within the mind, is that deterministic, or is it free will? In other words, is it an issue of genetics, or is it an issue of free will?
The fact that you are a really smart guy, Dr. Jones, is genetic.
Oh, let's move on.
I mean that sincerely.
Okay, I understand your point, and Chomsky does an excellent work in this field. I really applaud his work, and also Pinker has started dabbling in it a bit, and Chomsky takes this nativist approach, and I agree that so many things are innate. But my question is, are you suggesting that everything that is innate is always deterministic, or is it a combination thereof?
Well, I mean, how do we split the difference? I don't know that we can. I mean, when things are a multiplex, and as a result, we see the outcome of a chaotic participation. I don't know that we possess, as human beings, the ability to exactly demonstrate exactly what factors contributed to various outcomes. I don't know that we can do that. I don't know that we need to do that, but I think we can see that these factors are variable and that some of them are free, and so that there has to be some sense in which there are free choices being made, even if we don't necessarily understand which ones or to what degree or in what way.
Yeah. Now, just
Bob,
to
I think you just made a great comment by calling it free choice as well.
I don't
it drives
believe
me
in
nuts
free
when
will.
people talk about free will.
Yeah,
Because
will,
frankly, we don't have free will. We have free choice, and there's
Yeah.
never. I cannot simply choose to fly out of this chair right now.
right.
Because
It's
I'm
not. We're not talking about
incapable.
magic here. We're talking about options.
Yeah, your will would be restricted to your nature, it's obvious.
Right. Yeah, we're talking about options, not choice, not will. You know, from a theistic standpoint, a theist might argue when God calls the universe into existence, he calls it into existence from nothing. You know, I can't do that. You know, I can only create the things I create by taking things I find and doing with them things that can be done.
You know, the Apostle Paul makes.
Are you sure you can't do that?
Oh
Have you
no,
tried?
a presupposition is determined.
Stop it.
I hope that roof blows up. No.
you know, a referent point to the Apostle Paul, many times when he uses the term thelematos, he is using the idea not of will, but actually intent. And sometimes,
Right.
An intent can be frustrated. And so we certainly are talking about something, outside of the generic use of the context of will. Yeah, I didn't mean to muddy the conversation, but I was simply wondering what you were thinking, because, so many times I think that we try to move away from language too quickly, and we need to understand that the written language and the spoken language that we're utilizing is less than 0.0000001% of actually the linguistic activity that's in the mind
Yes.
itself, and it's such a minor thing, and there are so many complexities that are going on, and so how much of it is determined and how much of it is part of this free will or free choice issue, and I think that's something that.
Let's even take that back to the word phlematos that from the Koine Greek. The domain of meaning of words is not identical from language to language, so that
Exactly.
our word will that we use to translate that word into possesses ideas and applications that are very different from the way Koine Greek would have used that word, and so as a result, you're talking about more of the intent. I don't think that people even thought in those days of they probably use more magical terms for that, but we have lived in so much freedom compared to the past civilizations that for us will is a wild concept.
Exactly. One of the things that's interesting about Chomsky, he gets really into detail concerning whether a person speaks Chinese or whether a person speaks Japanese or English. We are basically arriving at the same meanings even though our phonemes are different. And that's interesting. But his argument would be from generation to generation, or from maybe century to century, everything changes. And so when trying to understand ancient texts, unless we have a genetic construct of the language, we are at a loss. That is, in understanding the creative mindset of how we actually interpret language, because it's rarely that it's completely external, that is outside of the head. Most of it's going on internally because we are in this paradigm or this genetic mindset.
But that doesn't get passed on.
And we're also stuck in our particular point in time where culture and what mankind has done and acquired in terms of knowledge and technology is constantly altering the context.
Yeah, Greg, do you
I
believe
wanted to take a moment. I'm sorry. I just wanted to take a moment to address all people who have been part of this hangout yet and have not had a chance to get in a word.
Sure.
Jeremy and Matthew and Esta Ann, have you anything to, or any
Actually,
comments to add here?
I do. how much control do we really have over a thought that pops into our head? It randomly comes into your head. Uh, then at that point, we produce language. So that seems predetermined to what I'm going to say, but I thought randomly, some way, energy-wise, coming into my head. You could say you can control your thoughts, or once you have a thought, then you can, from a past experience, that could be predetermined, where you go with that thought and what you say. Does that make sense?
Sure, and also
It makes perfect sense to me.
You're
But you could-
biologically limited to the implementation of thought too. I mean, for example, some people have certain disorders like Tourette's syndrome, where the kind of thoughts that come into their head and their ability to control the impulses are really determined by the condition of health of their body and their neurological system and the way that it is functioning or malfunctioning. So that it brings me back though to the notion that I don't think we really have a clear sense of just where the determinism ends and the free will begins.
Agree.
We can just merely know that they are actively involved in various ways that produce possibility rather than necessity.
And
And
people
I
also,
can relate exactly to what you're saying, because at least 3 times on every one of my shows, the thought pops into my head that Bob needs to die. And I know that it's not true, and I know that it's not accurate. I want to throttle him when he says something that makes me look silly, and I can't control that.
But when it comes to thoughts, I mean, you're not just having one thought, and it needs to be stated that you have the conscious and the subconscious thoughts. And when you start putting numbers on this, we're getting not into the thousands, but much more than that, all at the same time. And so, you're focused more on one thing as opposed to it all. It reminds me of the eye. The eye is seeing so much more than what you're just focused on, if that makes sense.
Right. Yes.
Your mind is, I remember one of my psych teachers, he went up to the board and he put a dot on the marker board, not marker board, didn't have marker boards back then, unfortunately, had a chalkboard, put a mark up there, and he said, "What do you see?" And some people said a dot, and the rest of us were writing down all kinds of things that we could see because it was much larger than the dot. And so our focal point may be the dot, but there's so much more to the eye and what the brain is actually thinking at the same time. And so when it comes to thoughts, we're getting into large numbers and a large scale, both consciously and subconsciously. And so it's very difficult, to determine, what's going on there at times.
It is a chaotic system, and by chaotic I mean so many variables that we can't juggle them in our head.
Right.
Even the variables that determine and the variables that are tweakable. There are so many of them that it's just a chaos and all going on inside the brain.
What are your thoughts
If
about
you look
going
at
in
it
and out of
from
the subliminal?
if you look at it like metaphysically from a dualistic standpoint, then you can make the argument that you can, if you stand outside of consciousness, like as opposed to a monoism, where you have the physical world and the spiritual world in one place. But if you step outside of time, then there is an awareness that you can kind of like watch it happening.
Mhm.
Like Keiko talks about particulate matter being able to be, their electrons, let's say, have the capability of being in any given space at any given time or not. It's an uncertainty principle in physics. So if you look at it from that perspective, but when you step outside of this three-dimensional world, as in your thought processes or whatnot, and you remove that space-time factor, then you basically have electrons that are, period, matter is, or energy is. So if you're stepping outside of time and you have that awareness that you are dualistic, and you could connect to that, and just like we're doing now, we're questioning why? Is it God? Is it Is there not a God? This is how we get there, I believe. Does that make sense, guys? Because I know I talk, kind of speak in riddles. It's kind of like mystical.
There's-
But
On a slightly unrelated note, I did want to say that again, to the other newcomers here, what you just did was sort of asserting yourself into the conversation and speaking is perfect. Please, those of you who aren't accustomed to these hangouts know that particularly Bob and I have absolutely no problem just dominating the conversation and talking and talking. So if you have something to say, by all means, speak up, wave, raise your hand, mute my microphone. You can click along the bottom.
I would like to attack Bob Graves right now, but what he said about, well, we understand through neurology that nothing we do is, we're not the authors of our lives when it comes to conscious. Our subconscious does drive everything. He made the exception of, okay, we agree that subconscious drives everything, but we have the chance to change that. Once we have a thought, then we can think about that thought and change it later on. That's still driven by the subconscious.
It is, and it
nothing is
sinks
fixed.
back into it. And it sinks back into it,
Okay.
where the drive occurs.
Okay.
Yes. In other words, if I change my values, if I go through a consideration to the point where now, semiotically, something has now attained for me a different meaning, a different value, that value now becomes subconscious, and I don't have to keep that in mind. It just remains, you know, and that's subconsciously driven. And I agree with you that I think that this is one reason why I would say that a great deal of what we do is very determined, and I think our level of freedom of choice is far less than what we would like to think it is. Far less.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that.
Yes.
I misunderstood you earlier. I'm sorry.
Wanted to make another comment on that, and now I forgot what it is. Just had a complete mental lapse, and
Yeah,
I'm
how
sorry.
about
This is live broadcast.
How about Jeremy or Daryl? Any comments that you might have?
Let Jeremy speak, and then.
Well, I don't have anything at this time.
Okay.
Well, thank you for joining us
anyway.
either way.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that was. Hello, Jeremy. I couldn't see well enough to know who that was there. Good friend of mine. Just
Oh,
down
really?
the road. Yeah,
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, welcome. How about you, Daryl?
Yeah. You know, one thing that I think just kind of always surfaces with me is this whole conversation that we're having, you know, free will versus, something predetermined, if I understand right. You know, the fact that we have come together and in a setting like this, to me, is a good indicator that there's something working there that goes beyond something determined. It's something that we're looking forward to, something that we're opening ourselves up to, one another, to hear one another's thoughts, to exchange ideas, and see what becomes of it. So to me, that factors into this. I'll say, like Esther's saying, if this makes sense.
Oh, I do remember the thing that I had wanted to say. It actually was a viewer comment, and I blanked on that. So that it came through. Are any of you familiar with the experiments of Benjamin? I don't know how to say his last Libet. He's from
familiar.
Chicago. This is a neurobiologist, I believe, that did a series of experiments, basically rigging something up that asked people to watch, without getting too technical, the EEGs can track like an oscilloscope. He turned that into more of a clock. It was just a dot that went around in a circle. He asked them to track where that was when the thought occurred to them to click something. And then, of course, the computer registered when the click actually happened. And he tried to use that to determine the difference in timing from when the impulse occurs to when the action is carried out. the issue that he ran into, and I don't know if it's what he was expecting or not, was that we are well aware of how long signals take to get from our brain to our limbs and make the muscles work to do these things. And there were it was quite consistent that the times at which these people reported having noted that they wanted to do this or they had the urge to click, and having actually clicked the urge came after the action must have been initiated in their brain.
Right.
So they perceived that this was their own personal, random, spontaneous moment. Okay, I'm going to do this now. And they had already started doing it before they even were aware of the urge to do it, according to their own report of where the
And I
point
think
was on the
one
clock.
can draw several different conclusions from that. I don't think we have to draw this. I don't think that it forces a particular conclusion either. It may mean that our actual decision process is not a conscious one, but that our once we make a decision, we experience it as if it were a conscious one, but really with latency to when that decision was actually made and initiated. And I would wonder if Matthew would agree with that in terms of what he was even saying before about subconscious drives.
Yes, absolutely. And that study that he was talking about has been reproduced, it's been reviewed. That's fact now. We understand that everything that we do is generated well before our conscious act of doing it, and it is scary. A lot of people won't accept it, even though it's fact, but it is a fact, and it's been reproduced. That's how things are, and it's very scary to realize that our brain, our subconscious, is driving us, and the subconscious is the author. That is terrifying to a lot of people.
But it shouldn't be, because
Have any of you read any work by Daniel Dennett?
Absolutely.
The Four Horsemen. Yeah, I believe Dan Dennett covers this one in his book Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon. I think this is one that he discusses in that. I know I've read his work on it, but he makes some fantastic points, and things that struck me right away is that they have a very objective method of measuring the point at which the click occurred, obviously, because the computer registers the click, but they're using an extremely subjective measure of self-report for when that urge occurred based on a clock that goes by the millisecond. Now, there's something to also be said with the delays that happens between our visual cortex and our eyes themselves, as well as Bob, your dog is distracting me. That is a dog, right?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Just a really big cat. Okay. Or it's a ghost, like a shadow people.
It walks around behind me every so often and tries to get my attention.
I normally can't see Bob when we broadcast, so that threw me off. But there's plenty of things that can delay our perception of when we have a feeling that are not necessarily just the fact that it happened in our subconscious and we weren't consciously aware of it, but our conscious mind is actually living in a bit of a delay to the world around us. We have this
latency.
Right, but I'm never exactly experiencing this moment as it is, because it takes time for my brain to interpret the moment around me and to make sense of that. So asking them to report based on a observation that they're making is going to have a delay, and I don't know exactly how long that delay is, but in this case it said up to 200 milliseconds was the time associated with it.
That's quite a bit. That's a fifth of a second. But there's a book that is now out of print called Human Intelligence. There's a number of books by that title, but there was a book that came out somewhere in the mid-'70s of that title, and it talked about this very unusual experiment where they discovered that the field of vision for each eye is operated, that the back of the brain that processes what the eye sees, that both eyes are processed by separate areas on, so that the left field of vision and the right field of vision are for both eyes are processed in different areas of the brain. They were able to put people into a room and flash a symbol on one side of a screen and have their eyes so that they couldn't see both sides. They set it up as a way so they'd flash a symbol on both sides of the screen, and they would have the person write the symbol they saw and say the symbol they saw, and they could get people to see two symbols, say one, write the other, and not be consciously aware of the fact that that's what they did.
Oh.
That was astounding.
That's pretty sweet.
And it was taught in a section on split brain, but wow, when you stop to realize that, it does make you realize that there's far more sophistication and buffering and layers of indirection involved in what becomes for us our eventual consciousness.
Would anybody be upset if we moved on a bit to that
Sure.
brain consciousness, the dualism concept?
Go ahead.
That's another one that this sort of does lead into quite a bit, and I think it's absolutely fascinating. Things like the split brain or alien hand syndrome that happens to people that have had their corpus callosum severed for
Yes.
epilepsy treatment,
Right.
where they just lose conscious control of the hand, and it becomes almost. What's really cool about alien hand syndrome is these people have a hand that does what it wants to, but obviously it's being controlled by their brain still. And what it does is things like they'll wake up to go to work in the morning, and of course we never want to wake up to go to work in the morning. So as their right hand that they're consciously controlling is brushing their teeth or shaving, their left hand is unbuttoning their shirt and getting them ready for bed or to go back to bed.
Right.
And it's just the most fascinating thing.
Sadly, some people have even theorized that in the split brain, when the corpus callosum is severed, that there may actually be two distinct individuals now operating within this organism, unaware of each other. That, and one of them has control of speech, and the other one does not, and therefore there's one of them not talking. And that, when you stop to think about it, is a strange thing to think about.
Which one of them are going to heaven?
You're right. That's exactly the question I asked myself when reading about that.
Excellent, Matthew.
Yeah.
That's a good.
It certainly complicates the oversimplistic notions, I think, of redemption.
They both need to be saved.
Need to be? Yeah.
Whatever.
Well, how is the one that doesn't have control of speech going to confess that Jesus
Oh, wow.
is Lord? I'm telling
Sign
you.
language.
So
Sign
yeah,
language.
okay, yeah. There you go. There you
Right,
go.
with that alien hand.
Otherwise, one of them goes to hell, the other goes to heaven. Which one is responsible for it? Depends on which hand you used, I guess. But it is sad when you stop to think about what the implications could be, or strange. But and by the way, they don't do that for epilepsy anymore. I'm pretty sure they don't split the brain anymore. But at one time, it seemed to cure the problem.
Yeah, damaging
I
the
don't know
brain
how
can change a lot of behavior. That was a fact.
Yeah.
Or even stimulating the brain, or doing things. It's great reading about or watching videos even of when or brain surgery is going on, and they can take a little probe and touch with a very light electrical current into different areas of the brain, and people will report. This is how they know, aside from functional or fMRIs, this is how they know how the brain and the body are correlated, is that this part of the brain is damaged or touched, and these people have sensation or lose sensation or do something spontaneously with a part of their body that they're not consciously doing. And it's cool because they've actually been able to replicate out-of-body experiences and
Right.
plenty of other things that are very commonly associated as religious experiences, and shown that they're really just the brain doing something that it naturally does when this part
Greg, I would say
is
not just.
overstimulated or fires up.
I would actually say not just. We cannot tell the difference between what the brain implements and what the brain does. We really can't tell. So, but it does raise the question. It really does. One of the things that seems so strange is the elasticity of the brain. When a person is like in a car accident and they can't walk, but they can learn to walk again. And it's not that they forgot how to walk, it's that the area of the brain that knew how to walk has been damaged. But other areas of the brain can now take on that function and relearn what the body is doing, and that's really what physical rehabilitation is all about. The elasticity of the brain, bringing new cells to a new function, and learning to do that, and that's perhaps part of the reason for these phantom limb concepts. You've got brain cells that have been accustomed to interpreting certain neurological stimulus as meaning something about what's going on in the body, and then that area of the body is gone, but the nerve endings may still be stimulated in various ways, who knows, maybe even randomly, that the brain continues to interpret according to the way it's learned already through habit to already associate. It's a very strange thing. Hypnotism can sometimes alter that.
So we do have a handful of theists. The atheists are outnumbering the theists moderately in this discussion. Well done, us. But the internet is the only place that happens, by the way. I'm curious. Those of you that do identify as theists, is this something that you struggle with in a existential sort of a concept, that the mind, or that which is a commonly thought of in religious concepts, I guess, as the soul, being something that seems to be, at least, or is highly dependent upon the physical structure of the brain?
No, never thought of it as a problem. Never did. In fact,
do you believe in that there will be any sort of afterlife? That, I mean, if after you die, that your consciousness in any way will continue after your brain no longer houses it?
I would think that personally, as a theist, I do believe it will, but I believe it will experience an entirely different sense of self, existence, and in a manner where I don't think I could even begin to describe it. I don't think I could even know it. I don't think I could even identify with it. It's kind of like if we were two-dimensional creatures and suddenly became three-dimensional creatures. How do we make sense of the third dimension now that we can see it? In terms of the old, it's just a totally different experience and existence. Difficult to relate to, but I would, I see the indwelling, as it were, of the personality is now constrained through the biology as to limits, as to what it can and can't do, and uses the biology to implement its processing. But as to whether or not it exists separate from it, I would think it does. However, with those limits removed, it would have to be something so foreign to what we experience now that we wouldn't even know how to describe it or talk about it, and or make sense of it, and we couldn't even begin to guess with any intelligence what that actually might be.
I can agree with that. I think you said it well as far as my perspective. Jeremy, looking at you now.
We're getting, yeah, I was going to say we're getting some nodding and things.
Those are not-
How about Esta? We don't know where you stand on that one, or I don't, at least. I don't even know if which camp you would identify as part of. Do you have anything to add to what Bob said?
Well, I am a theist, but with a very different, finding myself in a place of thinking through and asking a lot of questions and challenging. I think when your beliefs change as well, that kind of puts you in a new realm, and it's hard to really say. But right now, I'm a theist, and I'm actually at the point of thinking in this reality, it's a dualistic type experience. But when you talk about the afterlife of monoism, being one with God, maybe that's the part that goes on and survives. So, do I believe in God? or am I God, a part of God? So like, can we have, are we atheists and theists at the same time? Because there's the 2 points in this world that we can't come to agree upon, but maybe in the next we are God. We are one. That's where
That's very Tom Cruise of you.
I have no idea what you mean by that.
No, I'd say.
Isn't that a Scientology thing?
No, I don't think so. I would.
No, that's the Mormon thing.
No, I would agree. No,
No.
I would personally agree that when we're talking about spiritual reality, we're talking about an immaterial reality, and we're therefore talking about something we know nothing about. We have a sense of it. It's kind of like even talking about the subconscious mind. It sort of emerges the processes as they drive out into our behavior and into our thoughts. But it is an unknown, and I think that for people like Estienne, it's Estienne. People like many people who would associate themselves as free believers are definitely moving away from these clear definitions and seeing some of these definitions as merely graspable models that are neither true nor false, but just ideas that are perhaps parallel or allegorical in a way I can never know the other side of until I get there, And so many of these people, as theists, would still be coming to a place where they are accepting the fact that that we have no idea what the details are.
Greg, I might be able to shed a little light, at least from my position, and that is, I agree with Bob. I think there's something to look forward to that we know extremely little about, but I do have a great measure of confidence that something goes beyond, once I leave this body or this body is no longer functional, I'll put it that way. But at the same time, I can say that if it doesn't happen, who's going to be disappointed? I won't. I won't know anything anymore. So,
sort of the inverse Pascal's wager on that one.
Right. There's nothing to be, nothing to be disappointed about. No one to be disappointed. Yeah.
Right. And I can live with that, both ways.
I've got to interrupt you guys. We are out of time, and I hate this, but I want to do one thing tonight to give respect and attention to each and every one of you guys. My wife and I attended a Pentecostal revival Monday night, and it was off the charts. Lots of hollering, screaming, over 120 people speaking in tongues at the same time, and we were not even in the upper room. And so I would like to ask, I was really fascinated with Christopher's his interest in the psychology of things tonight, and I wanted to know your thoughts, just in brief, because we need to close out, and so make these your closing thoughts. And Christopher, would you start first? Why do people speak in tongues? Why do they get ecstatic and get into this rhythm of feeling like they have the Holy Ghost and yada, yada, yada? What are your thoughts?
It is an operationally conditioned state, and it's hypnagogic, and they started it when they were young, and they're able to access it like that.
I think you nailed it. Bob?
I largely agree. I do think that speaking in tongues is actually a just a personal way of trying to connect expression with inarticulate thought without having to use language to do so. And I don't see it as being anything like what the people who claim to be speaking tongues tell us it is, but I think it can also be very therapeutic.
Anne?
Sorry, my mic was off. I don't really have any further statements. I just appreciate the opportunity, and I guess I was predestined to come here because I just found that group on Facebook and clicked and you said come on in, so I did.
Awesome.
Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
I've got to say that I agree with Christopher. It's just I've never done it personally, but I know that speaking with Daryl and hearing what his thoughts were on it, I mean, he was basically trained to do it. So, and tried to train his kids to do it.
That's so true. Matthew.
Hey,
I grew up in a Pentecostal church, a hardcore one of the hardest core ones, and it is nothing but malarkey driven by peer pressure. When people do it and they push it on each other, and that if you see one do it, there's generally a lot more that do it because they're in a group, and it's always in a church like that. It's always generally one of the top few people, one of the most respected, or the ones with the most power that generally start doing it, and then it feeds off of them, and it's just peer pressure driven malarkey is all it is.
Yeah, the evangelist Monday night was, I mean, these people at the altar, quote unquote, were trying to get the Holy Ghost or with evidence of speaking in tongues, and they never did speaking in tongues until he got up in their face and started speaking for them. And a lot of people were wooing the Spirit, you know how that goes. And then they started speaking and shouting and just gathering around. I had my iPad in my hand. I was filming a little bit, and my wife stopped me, and so you're going to have to blame her for not getting all the footage. But it was funny. I had a good time. Daryl, what are your thoughts?
well, I was most of my life raised being taught the Bible, and there is something that is described in the book of Acts, something that took place at a certain place at a certain time, where people were speaking in other languages. And somewhere in translation, we come up with a term called speaking in tongues. And I think that what these other guys have said is absolutely true, but it was something that may have some legitimacy at a point in history, but today it's something that basically people play with, and it becomes a control factor and all kinds of things. And it's the easiest thing to fake that you can probably find in any church.
Yeah, I see something that's lost in translation. To me, speaking in tongues is an entirely auto-generated phenomenon that has nothing to do with any spiritual gift. It's nothing like that. But I do think that there is, for some people, other than those who are just doing it out of force, there is a sense in which it can help a person connect with their inarticulate thoughts and feel as though they've expressed it. And that is all it is. I don't see it as anything strange or phenomenal or magical or spiritual or anything.
Greg, I wanted you to be last because I thought you would be the best at speaking in tongues. Could you give us, how you do this? I mean, come on,
Give
us
an example.
Yeah, that would be interesting.
I would love to, but before I do, I wanted to say, Daryl, thank you. I love that you brought up the book of Acts and how the speaking in tongues, as I understand it, theologically even speaking, is supposed to be that people spoke in tongues unknown to them, but everybody understood them. It's the apostles stood there and spoke, and every person who heard them heard what they were saying in their own original language. So it seems that if you go to these Pentecostal churches and anybody claims to be speaking in tongues, and that you can't understand everything that they're saying in your own original language and dialect, they're obviously faking it, even from a theological standpoint. That would be a remarkable action.
The New Testament
That's
speaks
the
of
Babel fish, right?
Right. The New Testament speaks of speaking in tongues in several different ways. I don't think they're all the same dynamic they're talking about. So the Acts situation was a completely different dynamic.
In chapter 2, there is a particular term that's used, apothangosthai, which means, in the context, it means to orate like a prophet, to speak very clearly. It's very articulate. And these people, according to the writer, did speak that way, and people could understand. Now, from a linguistic standpoint, we don't know whether it was the language spoken or whether it was something in the ear. And so I think Bob would agree with me that, you know, my speech is nothing but compressions and decompressions, and whatever the mind does with it is much secondary in a sense. But with that stated, what are your thoughts? Can you speak in tongues for a few minutes, Greg?
I can give it a shot.
I would love for you to. I mean, come on, go for it.
Smack your hand with the finger.
You can do it. You can do it.
Right, I have like I am completely ignorant to this in my actual personal experience. I have never once in my life seen, other than a video like online, there's somebody trying to speak in tongues or claiming to speak in tongues. So let me see if I can channel the atheist spirit here. Hola, ¿cómo estás? That's close. Guten Tag. Damn it. These are all real languages.
That's malarkey.
The prophets rebuke you, Greg. Hey, Christopher, just out of curiosity, what can we do to help people like this? Because I think that your background really gives people a chance to get away from this. What can we do to help people like this?
People that speak in tongues, or people that are raised in Pentecostal churches?
Both.
Both. I think that Pentecostal is almost so fringe. I would think that they would almost need the same kind of deprogramming that people that come out of cults would need.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I think that you're so right. You know, one of the things that was happening the other night, it was just overwhelming. It was like everybody was saying yes, 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 and they had parked their minds, and they had completely given, you know, quote unquote, their will over to the evangelist, and it was really sad.
I have an interpretation of what Greg was saying.
Oh, do you?
Yes. He was saying, "I am God, and I am pissed."
Okay. Well, let's go off the air doing this. I want all of you guys to speak in tongues, and let's just go off the air having fun. Go for it.
Okay, everybody, all at once.
1, 2, 3, go. Well, this has been the Cult of Honesty, and we have had a lot of fun. Goodbye.